Hello my dear chess friends, this is the first game that we are going to analyze. Magnus Carlsen was playing against Vishy Anand in 2013. That was the game number 5 of their championship match. Well, what Magnus is good at? Well, definitely Magnus is good at almost everything related to chess. But what he does perfectly well, he is able to win equal positions, especially equal endgames. Well, I do often win equal positions. For example, if I don't get any advantage, I have to play approximately equal position. But I play the moves that contain a lot of risk, so it's a kind of a psychological game. I play a move that weakens my position, but at the same time provokes my opponent to make a mistake where I get a chance to outplay him. Magnus plays in a different way. He makes no mistakes, but pressures his opponent and provokes him to make a mistake by playing only, if not the most strong, but definitely strong moves. At least the moves that doesn't weaken his position. So that's why he is so good at winning equal positions and especially equal endgames. And in this game we are going to meet approximately equal endgame with where Magnus had slightly better chances to succeed, but Vishy was defending his position perfectly well. However, finally, after 50 moves, he made one small mistake and because of that lost the game. Okay, let's take a look at the game. I'm sure you will learn a lot, and well, here your ability to play the endgame may get improved, or your ability to outplay your opponent in equal positions. So Magnus started with c4 move, after which the game transposed to Queen's Gambit, and Queen's Gambit is actually a good choice for the World Championship matches because this opening is very solid. Black usually gets secure positions, and usually the fate of the game is decided in the end game. Knight c3, and here Vishy plays c6. Well, c6 kind of a semi-Slav pawn structure. But this move allows white to get the control over the center. Well, you know, probably I'm also a big fan of Slav and semi-Slav constructions, but I do not play c6 in this position. If I were black, I would start with knight f6 first, waiting until he plays knight f3, and only then I continue with c6. I would like to eliminate this option, to make e4 not possible in this variation. However, you may say, okay, knight f6, what if they play bishop g5, or c takes, e takes, d5, and the Carlsbad pawn structure? Right, probably this is what Anand didn't want to play, and I actually prefer another move order. If I were playing this position, then the game would start with c6 move. I mean, the c6 is the second move. Knight c3, knight f6. Here I'm fine with bishop g5 because it's d takes c4, or knight e4 is the second move. Okay, but Vishy was okay to play this position and let white play in e4, d takes e4, knight takes e4. And this opening is known as Marshall Gambit. Well, here the most common move is this, then bishop d2, and queen takes d4. That's why this opening is called Marshall Gambit. So bishop takes there, queen takes here, black is a pawn up, but actually this position is quite dangerous. For example, taking on g2 leads to a disaster for black. Why? Bishop f3, queen g6, knight e2, threatening with knight f4. There is another threat of queen d6 and rook g1. For example, knight a6, bishop c3. This is a huge threat. How to play? Well, maybe this. Then still this move, queen f6, knight g3, and with a lot of threats. For example, knight here and there. g7 is always vulnerable, and well, of course, black is 2 pawns up, but they struggle with their development. Well, taking the pawn on g2 is not obligatory. Instead, black may continue with such move like knight a6. Bishop a5, we are threatening with a mate. b6, but queen d6. And taking this bishop is a huge mistake. Then rook d1, still threatening with a mate. f6, letting the king to escape. Well, what else to suggest? Because such move like bishop b7 fails because of queen to d7, and this bishop is lost, and then one of the pieces on the edge file is lost as well. So f6, f3, chasing the queen away, and then queen c6, gaining this rook. So white is completely winning here. Of course, nobody asks black to capture on a5. They can just play e5 with their pawn, and now what? Bishop goes there, knight e7, rook d1, and bishop f5 defending here. So, for example, after e5, this strategy doesn't work so well. For example, this move. Then this bishop may move. Well, I don't think it should move to b7, but it can move to e6 or f5. Well, let's say e6. However, then still f3, and it's still a kind of a problem. I didn't find anything better than queen there, check, but then g3, and the queen has to retreat back. So queen d8, for example, fails because of this check, and then the queen is hanging, and bishop d7 fails because of rook takes d7. So you see, so black still experienced serious problems after e5, but anyway, e5 was a much better way. Okay, fine. So, well, Marshall Gambit is really dangerous, and I wouldn't recommend you playing it as black. I don't know what here, for example, Vishay Anand had in mind. So what was his, what could be his reaction to this move, bishop d2? But Magnus played knight c3. But before we continue with that move, I just want you to explain that playing this strategy for black is quite risky. Instead of bishop b4, which is the best move, definitely the best move, there is another idea of playing knight d7, where black pieces are a bit passive. So, well, in my opinion, Anand played a risky opening, and in case of bishop d2 here, he could get into trouble. Maybe he had some opening preparation. But even if he did play just this ordinary move, his position still doesn't look good. For example, knight g6, similar to Caro-Kann and to some French defense positions. Bishop d3, then what then? c5. So attacking the center right away. Or knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, but it doesn't look so good. Because now the bishop is here, and with queen d3, this bishop forms a strong battery attacking h7. Now, for example, well, if just bishop e7, castle, castle, then queen d3, bishop g5 will provoke g6 as a weakness. Having in mind that this bishop is still bad, white is definitely better in this position. Well, of course, bishop e7 is not the main move. There are two other continuations, such as bishop b4, for example. Bishop b4, bishop to d2. What else? Well, king f1 is interesting. King f1 is really interesting, and I felt that maybe Magnus could play these. The game was played in 2013, so it's a lot of many years ago. But h4, what can you say about this? Nowadays, it's quite a tradition to move the h-pawn if you don't know how to develop your pieces. So people move this pawn to h6 to try to create weaknesses into the enemy camp. In some variations, h4 is even the third move of the game. Can you believe it? For example, it's quite common against Grunfeld. Well, h4, let's say black plays naturally c5, h5, castle, rook h4. Nice mobilization of the white's pieces. Well, white is better in this position. White has advantage, and the king on f1 is relatively safe. So king f1 would definitely surprise Vishay Anand if this position appeared. But even bishop d2 is fine. For example, then, if this bishop retreats to e7, it's queen e2, and white has the initiative. Their pieces are better, and this bishop is a kind of an issue. Another move here can be queen a5, a3, take. The game would pass to the endgame, and then b5. But, well, b5 to develop this bishop and undermine the position, but that provokes white to play c5. Now black gets this nice spot, but look at their bishop. It's totally constrained. Okay, let's go back. So instead of playing knight e4, it was better to play c5 right away. Then, for example, castle, c takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop e7. But after knight b5 and such moves like bishop f4, white still keeps some small but very stable advantage. Because of these two weaknesses and because of the bad bishop on c8, well, if we, for example, swap these two bishops, I would say it's equal. But with these bishops on the board, white is definitely better. So that's the reason why knight d7 wasn't played by Vishay Anand. He played the main line, bishop b4. Well, I have no ideas why Magnus didn't play this move. Probably he didn't want to risk, but bishop d2 is definitely the strongest continuation. He played knight c3. How to play? c5 was played. Well, of course, one of the main ideas of black is to destroy the white pawn center. Another option that could be possible here instead of e5 was, instead of c5 was e5. And they sacrifice the pawn. It's not queen e5, however, queen e5 deserves attention as well, but it's queen d1, king d1, knight, bishop f5, and then knight d7, threatening to take this pawn. And after f4 and castle queenside, black definitely has a strong initiative. They are down a pawn, but look at how their pieces are mobilized, and with this bishop they successfully block. They have some squares to invade into the enemy territory. Well, and they can always take here, because then the pawn takes. If bishop takes, the king falls under a discovered attack. Well, that's why taking on e5 isn't so good, and it makes sense to play this move, not knight f3. Knight f3 falls under e4. So e takes, queen takes, bishop d4, threatening to take g7, knight f6, castle queenside, and after bishop e6, well, there is no much advantage for white, to be honest. So e5 was also a possible option. And what I like about this position is that black successfully develops their light squared bishop. Vishay played c5, which is also common. a3 and bishop a5. Well, to be honest, in this position, black has a choice. They can take on c3 as well. And just depends on which type of the position black wants to play, because both moves are approximately equal. So pawn takes with the idea to improve the pawn structure, but black doesn't want to take on d4. Knight f6, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e2, castle. And then black solves their problems with this move. However, white has a strong pawn center, and in future intends to play d5, which may limit the black pieces and at the same time allow white to create a protected passed pawn. So, moreover, there is a bishop pair. And the black's task is to play against the pawn on c4. So, such moves like this are possible here. Well, I would say I would prefer playing it for white. Well, bishop a5, knight f3. Well, here, of course, not taken there because nobody wants to get the pawns tripled. So knight f3, knight f6, bishop e3, supporting the center. Well, this move has some drawbacks, and later you'll see them. Knight c6, and for example, if in this position, I'm sure that most of you played something natural like bishop e2. I would even consider this move myself, but then I realized that actually after knight e4, attacking on c3, I have to play this move, and then the pawn structure is ruined. And after c takes d4, because of the pin, I have to take with the minor piece, keeping the pawns vulnerable here. So this endgame definitely favors black. I would say it's even strategically winning for black, if only they play these two moves. Strategically winning doesn't mean that the position is winning. Usually these drawbacks can be compensated with some piece's activity. Okay, so which move do you think Magnus played here? All these moves are theory, so here you have just to learn. It's queen d3. Protecting here and taking this square under the queen's control. C takes d4, knight takes d4, and now a drawback of this move is knight g4. Well, another possible option that deserves attention here was such move like knight e5, which is quite common, for example, for Sicilian when the queen goes to d3. Then queen goes back, but then knight e4 is a fork. Queen moves, bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, knight c5, and here, because of the pawn structure, black experienced some difficulties. And the position of the knight restricts this bishop. And I cannot say that this bishop is also good. Well, we may look for some discovered attacks like that in order to capture on c5 and improve the bishop, but it doesn't really work. At least not in this position. So knight g4 was played instead, which is also a good move. And that forces Magnus to speed up his development and castle. And if bishop takes on c3, he is about to take on c3 with the queen. Well, what if instead knight takes c6? Then, of course, the queen has to be exchanged. Bishop c3, ruin the pawn structure. Knight takes e3, and if you look at this position, I would say it is a draw. Well, at least it's equal. And actually, well, the main problem is this bishop for black. The main problem of white are these two pawns. They are the black's targets. But generally speaking, the position is quite simple, and none of the players has real chances to play for a win. Well, actually, in the game later, you'll see that the position was drawing, or it's better to say equal, for almost the whole game, but Magnus somehow managed to outplay his opponent. Okay, so castle queenside, knight takes e3, but now f takes e3, and if black decides to take there to simplify, white is about to capture with the e pawn and improve their pawn structure. Well, castling in this position could work, but then here white would obtain with some small advantage. Knight c6. So here, for example, taking on d3 is a mistake, and I'm sure you understand why. Because of this intermediate check, after which I'll show you. So queen takes, knight e7, king h8, and in this position, which piece to play? Let me play with the bishop. So I'm going to do this and end up with extra piece. So this move should be played, after which I can at least continue with this move, threatening to take here, here, and then let the knight escape. Another possible move is just to take on h7, but I think bishop e4 is more solid. That's why knight c6, b takes c6. And b4 can be played immediately, with the idea to restrict this and this bishop as well. Queen takes, bishop takes, and in this position white seems to be better. c5 is a possible move. Well, I wouldn't recommend it to play it now. Maybe I first recommend you playing this move to enter these squares with your knight, which also constrain the enemy bishop. Because if you play, let's say, if you play c5 immediately, what if they just play e5 and release their bishop to e6? But anyway, white is better there. So f takes e3 and bishop goes to c7. Knight takes e6, b takes e6, queen takes, bishop takes, and bishop e2. So now we got approximately equal endgame. Black has a bishop pair. White gets a better pawn structure because the pawn on c6 is more a weakness comparing to the pawn on e3. But when Vishy Anand decided to enter this endgame, he underestimated Magnus's ability to play equal endgames. Well, nowadays we know that Magnus is really good in equal positions. He knows how to maneuver, how to play solid moves and not allow his opponent to obtain any counterplay. But it was 2013 and, well, everyone understood Magnus is definitely a strong chess player, but just a few people realized, and even I think Anand realized it only after the game, that Magnus is definitely good in equal positions. And equalizing the position after the opening stage of the game doesn't obligatory mean a draw. Because if, for example, it was, let's say, Sergei Karyakin playing against Vishy Anand, the game could end in a draw in just 20 moves. But let's see how Magnus is able to outplay his opponents in equal position. And this game just shows this very important example for us from which we can learn a lot. Well, first of all, what Black should do? Black should activate their pieces. This bishop on c8 is passive, it should be activated. The rooks should be activated as well because it's easy for white. They can use the d6 square to double if they need. They can set the other rook on the semi-open file to pressure f7 if needed. So king e7 was played by Vishy, and it's not a mistake. There is no need to castle when it's the endgame. You just need to make sure that the king in the center doesn't become the object of the attack, which means that white cannot activate their pieces and at the same time attack the enemy king to force it several times in a row. To force it to move several times in a row. So that's why here king e7 is relatively safe. I would say if there was a dark squared bishop, then it's definitely a mistake because this move still constrains the king, forcing it to go there or there. Well, d7 falls under discovered attack, but f6 fails because of this. So without a dark squared bishop, placing the king on e7 makes a lot of sense. Bishop f3, pressuring bishop d7. Well, you may say, why not to play a natural move bishop b7? Isn't it a better diagonal? Well, probably it is, but then there are some ideas like that, knight b5, knight d6, because the pawn is pinned. Well, the pawn is pinned there, and actually knight b5 can be played here, but Magnus decided to play another move. He played knight e4. So if you look at this position, you can say that white is better. And I would definitely say that for a human player, from a human player point of view, white is better. Why? Because it's easier for white to find which plan to follow. White gets the control over the d file, so d6 can be an outpost. There is also a pressure on c6. And there can be some pawn march on the queen side, like b4, c5 maybe, with the idea of creating a pass pawn on that flank. And the blacks' task is to activate their bishops. So activating their pieces, the activation of black pieces is the key to a success for black. But from the engine's point of view, the position is equal. Why? Because black weaknesses are not enough to let white to play for a win. And actually, both players realized it. At that time, their strength wasn't as good as the engine's strength, of course, but they were quite close to, they were maybe 300 points behind the leading engines at this time. So they both understand that actually black's position is solid enough to draw the game. But definitely it's easier for white to find the moves. Knight e4. So these are important spots, and actually this is a kind of a threat. That's why bishop b6 to stop it. However, c5. c5 to get the d6 square. What do you think Vishy Anand played in this position? If he just moves there, I think knight d6 and white is definitely better. That's why he found another way. He played f5. Why f5? If the knight moves, then the pawn is hanging and it can be taken for free. So let me just tell you a little bit about this move. Rook h d8, rook h to f1 with some pressure here. So this move has to be played, and then you can have in mind this idea to pressure there, or maybe you just first double on the d file. And here black has to stay under a passive defense. That's why the f5 move was a really good practical solution. C takes b6, f takes e4. And now I want you to think and tell me, what would you do if you were white in this position? Well, it's not so difficult to find the next move of white. I think it's quite obvious. But if you think that, the bishop is hanging, we should automatically take there, then you are mistaken. Why? Because after a takes b6, black improves their pawn structure and they have no problems at all. Maybe their pieces look more passive, but it's not a problem. They can activate their rook, they can play c5 after that. So I don't think that it's a kind of an issue. So I can even show it to you. So if rook d4 stops this, then maybe e5 works and black solves the problems with their pieces development. That's why you shouldn't, if you're playing for a win, you definitely shouldn't let black improve their pawn structure. b7, intermediate move to attack this rook. Now the rook moves. The pawn on b7 is lost, of course, but bishop takes e4 and we still have these two pawns separated, which means that the c6 pawn becomes the object of the attack. Well, now we can say that white is practically better because of better pawn structure. However, can you please pause this video and try to think about the white's plan? What do you think white should do in this position? How to play for a win? Okay. So some of you may say that it's enough just to activate pieces. And I would definitely say that yes, h7 is a kind of a hanging if they decide to double, but h7 can be protected. They can play g6, they can play h6 also. This is the main weakness. And ideally, you should double the rooks on the c file and try to pressure it. Because advancing these pawns, I mean this or that, means creation of new weaknesses and new targets for the white's attack. So this, then the rook on c5, and then maybe this move trying to pressure there, or maybe trying to pressure both pawns simultaneously, and at a certain moment of the game white would undermine with b5 if it works according to tactical ideas that may appear in that position. But doubling, then rook c5, rook a5 definitely is the best white's plan. However, first rook h to f1, rook b5, to control this square and activate the rook. Rook f4. Well, this move has several ideas. First of all, to attack the pawns if needed. Second, to double, because the invasion of the white rooks may allow white to win, because, well, if you only imagine the rook is on f7, there will be d7 hanging in case of king d6 or king d8, so this rook will move back, pinning or pressuring. Or if the king goes to, so rook comes to f7 supported with the rook from f1 and the king goes to e8, then these pawns are vulnerable. So this is another issue. That's why some immediate actions are required from black, and this is where Vishy Anand demonstrated why he was the best chess player for many years, why he was a world champion. He played g5, so he chases the rook away to not let them double. Okay, this move. Then h5. Now they double, but at least the pawns are not vulnerable here. And bishop e8 preventing this invasion. So, well, yeah, black still has some weaknesses, especially c6. But how this pawn can be attacked while the rooks are there? Well, maybe Magnus chose a wrong plan, but actually I think not. It only means that the position is equal and the black's defensive resources are enough to hold the position. Bishop c2. This move is required because of this attack and some pressure on e3. Rook comes to c5 to pin. There is a threat of this move. And what I also want to say, if, for example, we exchange a rook pair and the bishop pair, then the position becomes even more drawing. Even if at least we remove the bishops from the board, it's a drawing position. That's why actually rook f6 to stop this move. Here both players are maneuvering with their pieces, trying to realize what the enemy plan is. Well, h4. Well, maybe h4 creates a weakness. Now g5 is a little bit weak. But it's not clear from this position. It will be more realistic later in the game. e4, a5. So again, well, this move definitely prevents b4, which makes b4 a weak pawn, but advancing the a5 pawn is also a kind of a strategic inaccuracy. I cannot say that this move is a mistake, it's a strategic inaccuracy, because later in the game, if there is no rook, this pawn can be a weakness. So king d2, unpinning. Rook comes to b5, attacking here, but b3. And with b3, white has a really good idea of playing a4. That would fix the pawn on a5, and it will also surround... I mean, the a5 pawn can be later surrounded with the rooks, with the white rooks. Well, and this pawn pair provides white with some really good chances to win the game by creating an outside passed pawn that can be moved to the through the a file to a8. So bishop h5, king c3, rook c5 check. King goes back to b2. And rook d8, trying to activate their pieces. So this is where I would say the position is definitely equal. Black compensates their weaknesses with their pieces activity. And this is what black should originally do when only they realize they have weaknesses. So this move is really good. And I would say that black is also playing for a win in this position. However, Magnus is known as a solid chess player who doesn't allow their opponents to play for a win, and doesn't risk, so he plays this move, preventing this invasion. Rook d4. So Well, looks like these rooks are active, but white still has a plan of attacking the weaknesses from behind. So somewhere from the back rank or from the 7th rank. That's why rook h6. Bishop d1. Well, bishop d1, and here I want you to say, would you exchange on d1 or not? You can pause this video and try to think, but to decide, you should calculate it. Well, of course, you can remember my words about drawing positions when the bishops are exchanged, but here, to make sure that you provide me with a proper evaluation, I want you to calculate some lines to make sure you understand it. Well, of course, the exchange of the bishops definitely simplifies the position. And if white makes a mistake, let's say kind of this move to playing for a win, then after rook d2, king b1, rook e5, they lose on e4, and there is also a mating threat. These pawns are hanging as well. So here even black loses. I mean, black wins, white loses. Well, but rook g6 is enough, and then this idea no longer works because there is a rook that cements the white's position. For example, rook d3, threatening to take here, but it's still equal. g5 is vulnerable. However, I would prefer playing this position for black. That's why if you are playing for a win with white pieces, you should keep the bishops on the board, which Magnus exactly did. Well, then rook b5 attacking here. What now? Do we lose the pawn? By the first glance it seems yes, but actually white's position has also a lot of defensive resources. King c3 attacking the rook, so the pawn is not hanging because of the rook being hanging. That's why c5. And from now it seems that the white king is a kind of an endangerer, but this is just an illusion. White's position is still solid enough, and they play rook b2 to defend it. Well, e5. e5 defends this pawn, and they have in mind the idea of playing c5. c5, I mean. But at the same time, this rook gets more space, and this pawn can be attacked from behind, and maybe e5 later in the game. So rook g6. In the game, Anand played a4, which definitely does make sense, but these options can be played almost always. Why not to try something else? For example, g4, saving the pawn. What happens then? If let's say rook h6, then a4 works perfectly well. For example, rook h4, rook takes b3, rook takes rook, and then which piece to take? What do you think? Does it make sense to capture with the a pawn to create a pass pawn, or you think it's better to take with the bishop? This is a very responsible decision, so I want you to pause this video once again and tell me which of these two moves is better. Well, maybe it's not easy to realize immediately, but taking with the a pawn would lead to a draw. Why? Well, the king is able to hold everything. So, for example, check, king d6, and bishop d3. And if, in case of this sacrifice and b2, the rook is able to defend the position from behind. In case of king c6, another check can be delivered. However, taken with the bishop would allow black to win the game. For example, rook takes g4, rook d1, so the bishop experienced some problems, bishop d3, but c4, and now if the bishop takes, it's rook c1, gaining the bishop. That's why bishop e2, rook e1, attacking both. And after king d here, then just this, and this pawn on e3 is lost, while the a and the c pawn are far advanced. The bishop is already there, and it will be easier for black to promote these two pawns, rather promoting these 2 on the king side for white. So g4 could provide black with practical chances to win the game, but I'm sure the game would end in a draw in such a case, because it's so obvious that in this position, instead of rook h6, it makes sense to continue with rook to c6. For example, king d7, rook g6, and after a4, well, it's actually quite similar to what happened in the game. Let's now look at what happened in the game. So it was a4 right now, rook takes g5, rook takes b3, bishop takes, which is good, but rook takes e5. Then rook attacks the other pawn. So here the main problem is that this rook doesn't threaten the pawn on a3. But rook d1 is played. Well, bishop d3, then c4. That's why here Magnus Carlsen plays an intermediate move, e5. King goes to d5, and another important move which not only saves the white's position, but allows them to get some practical chances to win the game. It's bishop h7. So what's the point of having the bishop on h7? Well, definitely this check. This is the point. For example, if the game continued with this, then check, king moves, bishop takes b3. Well, taking with the pawn doesn't make sense because king takes. That's why rook e3, pin. But here, for example, you can play this move, and after that king c2, and you are able... Well, then you can... Well, if you exchange, this is a drawing position. Why? Because this pawn falls, this king is able to stop the pawns on that flank, and that king stops these pawns, but cannot capture them. Well, if white wants to play for a win, rook h8, however, after king d5, it's still a draw. The pawn is vulnerable, and the a-pawn is too dangerous. Moreover, this king is quite close to the king side. Well, king c4 may be a better move, but still white holds the pawns, but well, there are just a few pawns left, and I still believe it's a draw. For example, this, and then king e6, and it should be a draw. Something similar could happen in the game. Visha played better. He played rook c1 first. King goes to b2, and this is where he made a mistake. He played this move, pressuring the pawn on g2. I think everyone can make such a mistake, because attacking a weak pawn is obvious. This pawn can hardly be protected. For example, rook g5, just h3 works. g3, then check and capture the pawn on h2, so white may even lose the game then. But rook g1 is a mistake because of something else. Let's now talk about rook e1, a more natural move. How the game could continue. King c3. And here the best option was not to take there, because it's a losing position, right? So it's a check, king moves, then the exchange of the rooks, then we take there, and because of the distant passed pawn, we win the game. So not taken on e5, but h3. For example, if rook takes, it's just king e5. And without the support of this king, these pawns cannot be advanced. And black can always destroy the a3 because it's located on a dark square. If g takes h3, it's rook e3 check, forcing the king to go to the second rank, and then just rook f3 holding the position. Well, black is 2 pawns down, but white has no progress, and these 2 extra pawns are actually double pawns. So rook e1 would allow black to draw the game, but they played rook g1, which by the first glance doesn't seem like a mistake. What do you think Magnus Carlsen played here? if he sees that he cannot save the pawn on g2. Right, the only other active option is bishop to g8. What now? Wisha played king c6, which was absolutely correct. But if only he did this move, after bishop takes b3, a takes b3, and e6, the king is unable to stop the e pawn. For example, king d4, rook h4 check, and then we take on b3. Now what? If rook g2, it's e7. And this position with two extra pawns, which are at the same time outside pass pawns, white is completely winning. And if black takes here, then it's rook g4, and two pawns on the flank allows white to win the game. Let's go back. So that's why king e4 is a mistake. King c6 is instead a better option. Check. Again, king b5 is too far from the pawn. And then it's e6, this and that can be played. So it's a winning position. Well, if it's not clear for you that this position is winning, then later we will get something very similar and I will demonstrate how exactly white wins the game. I will demonstrate your winning plan. So king to d7. Bishop takes b3 and white gains this pawn, black captures this one, and rook h4. Well, maybe here they still have some chances if they play this move. If, for example, rook h5, then it's rook e3. And if king b2 or king a2, it's just a repetition. In case of king a4, you can still repeat the position, or okay, instead of that, if they play king a4, well, you can deliver a check, and after king goes to b5, you can play c4, threatening with c3. And every time the king comes closer, you can play rook back, trying to stop this pawn, because with the king and the rook being located properly, white cannot reach any progress with these two pawns. In the game, Anand played king e6, which later resulted as a mistake. Why? Because actually in this position, white has not two but three pawns, and all of them are passed pawns. That's why after e4, this pawn becomes really dangerous. King takes e5, a5. King d6, rook h7. And despite of these pawns, there is a large distance between these two pawns. Well, it was king d5 played, but let's say this move is played. Then a6, rook a1. The idea was to locate the rook behind. This. Then that, king c4, king e6, rook b7, well, with the idea of advancing this pawn. If black loses this one, then the king is able to enter the enemy camp, and then a8 is promoted. So here black should be very accurate. Let's say king f6, and what do you think? What white should do here in order to progress? Maybe there are some other options, but I definitely see at least one plan which allows white to play for a win, which allows white to win actually. Can you find this plan? So try to picture the position. It's h4, king goes to g6, then let's say rook c7, just a waiting move. Oh, well, this move makes sense because it prevents the king coming to h5 or g5 or f5. In this case, it's rook c5 and the rooks are exchanged. And then the a7 pawn is promoted. Okay, so let's say they play king to h6 and we play h5. And then you may realize that black is in a Zugzwang. Every move they make, For example, any move they make with the king forces the king to go to the 5th rank and rook c5 exchanges the rooks. If, for example, instead they play a rook move, they lose the pawn on c5, and then the king helps the pawn to get promoted. This is the Zugzwang I was talking about. Well, in the game it was king d5, but even this move didn't help. c4, king c3, rook a2, a7, king c5, and h4, after which Vishay Anand resigned. Why did he resign? What do you think? Can you please pause this video and find a winning plan? First of all, I want you to understand that any checks like that and the king invading our camp isn't dangerous because we have checks from behind, from here and here, forcing the king to go back. Well, looks like the only option they have is just to keep the rook on the a file, which allows us to play the pawn to h6, rook g7, h7, and then rook g8, after which we are threatening to promote one of these two pawns. So, and at least one of the pawns will be promoted. Again, here exchanging the rooks, for example, king b6 and rook takes a7 is not a saving plan, because this is a far advanced, this is a distant pawn, which is already far advanced actually, and white just promotes, while white is able to hold the pawn on c4. This is how Magnus won the game. So you see, the position was equal for almost entire game, and there was no moment where Magnus could lose the game or black's position was better. So this illustrates how white is good in playing equal position, and especially equal in games. So finally, in this position, he found this maneuver, which activated his bishop and allows him to take on b3, getting the a pawn as a passed pawn. Then he advanced it, forcing the enemy rook to hold it, and then, because of his pawn majority on the king side, he created another passed pawn, and this is how he won the game. Well, unfortunately, Anand made a mistake. Well, we can say it's small inaccuracy, but this small inaccuracy was enough. So this inaccuracy happened, I think, at this moment where he played rook to g1, attacking the pawn on g2. Instead, rook e1, because the e5 pawn is the most dangerous pawn, and white would better keep more attention to this pawn and to their capabilities that white has because of this passed pawn. Okay, fine. I'm sure you enjoyed this game, and now you see that you can play for a win even in equal in games, so it's too early to offer a draw, but let's move on, and I'm sure that in my new videos you will definitely learn more about how to implement Magnus's ideas into your own games. Okay, let's move on.